Good evening. I'm Yona Harvey, and I teach in the writing program here at the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm super excited about introducing these artists who have crafted books with stories anchored in home, sibling relationships, family dynamics, and music, which plays a pivotal role in their storytelling. The Comix Journal noted in the instance of Rina's book, Blame This on the Boogie, that music functions not just as an essential method of self-expression, but as a way to transcend the grind of the normal world. The musicality and creativity of all three panelists this evening speaks to the week's themes of intimacy and CAAPP's overall commitment to amplifying the idea that Black study springs forth from our lives and what Don Lundy Martin has described as being in our bodies, in our art, in a kind of togetherness. Whenever I say that comics and cartooning is not kids' play, I'm being somewhat facetious, pushing back against the notion that the world of children or young adults has no literary or artistic merit, and that cartooning, comics, or graphic novels by association are not serious. But I'm not here to take a defensive stance on comics for the uninitiated. I'll just enter the house through the side door and say that children and young people are often the ones who witnessed firsthand the atrocities, contradictions, and inconsistencies of life, usually from the vantage point of their own homes, hometowns, and neighborhoods. One need only recall Edwidge Danticott's short story collection, Crick Crack, Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye, Toy Derricott's poetry collection, I, and Paulo Javier's poetry comic hybrid, OBB, AKA the original Brown Boy, to be reminded of this. To build a story and to really see with the freedom, abandon, defiance, and yes, even playfulness of a young person actually requires artists to transcend the kind of dullness and blind spots that can accompany adulthood. The work of Ebony Flowers and Rina Ayuyang does this. Their art is filled with wonder, tightropes, kinks, coils, traffic jams, everyday obstacles, wicked humor, and ultimately an unsuppressed joy. That joy is observed in Rina's color choices and kinetic line strokes, and in Ebony's shifts between cursive and print, and the image of a dark curl being pulled and plucked across 24 panels. There's a recurring push and a pull between obstacle and triumph that happens in their works. From first page to last, these creators keep us alert and actively engaged in their work and the world at large. I am thrilled to introduce Ebony Flowers, born and raised in Maryland, holds a BA in biological anthropology from the University of Maryland, College Park, and a PhD in curriculum and instruction from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she wrote her dissertation primarily as a comic. Flowers is also a Rona Jaffe Award recipient, and Hot Comb, her debut book, appeared on best of lists from The Washington Post, NPR, The Guardian, and the New York Public Library. Hot Comb won the Eisner, Ignatz, and Believer Book Award and received nominations for numerous others, including the NAACP Image Award and the Young Adult Library Services Association Alex Awards. Rina Ayuyang is an Eisner and Ignatz nominated cartoonist based in Oakland, California. Her online comic, Beginning's End, was nominated for an Eisner Award for Best Short Story, and her cartoonist diary contribution on the Comix Journal was chosen as a silver medalist by the Society of Illustrators in the 2016 Comic and Cartoon Art Annual. Her latest graphic novel, Blame This on the Boogie, published by Drawn and Quarterly, explores her family, Filipino identity, and American pop culture fandom. Stories from her self-published mini-comic series, Namby Pamby, were collected in the book Whirlwind Wonderland, co-published by Sparkplug Comic Books and Tugboat Press. Her work has also been exhibited in the Arlington Art Center and Cartoon Art Museum. She was a cartoonist in residence at the Charles Schulz Museum, ran the comics imprint Yam Books, and plays the nice co-host on the comics podcast, the Comix Claptrap. Marcel Walker is a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania-based freelance artist specializing in graphic prose, illustration, and graphic design. He's an expert on social applications for the graphic prose arts with the mission of championing comic books as a force for social good. Marcel writes and draws graphic prose and teaches workshops and classes on comic books and the narrative arts. His clients have included the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank and the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. In addition to his freelance work, he's currently the lead artist and project coordinator for Hutzpal, Superheroes of the Holocaust, an ongoing educational series published by the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. Since 2016, Marcel has served on the board of directors for the Toonseum, Pittsburgh's Museum of the Comic and Cartoon Arts, and he's presided as board president since 2018. Please welcome our first presenter, Ebony Flowers, followed by Rina Ayuyang, and then a moderated conversation with Marcel Walker.
Hi, everyone. First, before I begin, I'd like to thank Yona and Stefan for inviting me to come and talk to everyone about my comics. I'm very happy to be here, and let's just jump right into it. Going to share my screen, so give me a moment here. Okay. Hopefully, okay. So let me play this. So I'm going to spend my time here talking about my making comics process and tie it into motherhood. And that's because I am a mom, and I'm a mother to a now toddler. He's about to turn 3 years old. And what I've come to realize with being a mom to a young child and also with making comics, there are two aspects of my life that are very intimate and take up the bulk of my time and influence one another in ways that I'm still processing, and I'm still kind of trying to be very open to and not judge where, you know, the dynamics of being a mom takes my comics, and then vice versa. The dynamics of being a cartoonist takes my understanding or the way I do mothering. And so I started making comics later in life. Like Yona said, my background is in biological anthropology and education. I actually used to be a high school biology and environmental science teacher, and I never considered myself an artist. I never thought about drawing, let alone going to art school or doing like something like making comics as an actual career. But when I started my master's and then continued on with my PhD at Wisconsin, I came across a course taught by Linda Berry, which I now know is a very well-known and famous cartoonist. At the time, I had no idea who she was. I had no interest in comics at all. And in taking her classes and then eventually being her project assistant and working with her for about 4 years, so pretty much throughout my entire PhD, working with her, the two main things that I learned is that making comics is fast and slow. And by that, I mean that she taught me quick drawing and writing exercises that I then applied to making the narratives and the stories that appear in Hot Comb. And since becoming a mom, I became a mom in 2019. I've also understand my, at least right now, my comics making process is being fragmented. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Um, I mean that more along the lines of uh, my process involves quick drawing and writing exercises, still involves that way of working, but also I engage in a lot of writing and drawing exercises that I don't directly apply to the actual comic that I'm working on. And I'll explain a little bit more about that down the road when I show you some of the stuff that I'm working on. But as of right now, I find that very satisfying, and I don't think um, I would be, I would do things, draw and write in a way that weren't directly related to um, my comics if it wasn't for becoming a mother and needing that kind of like extra space. And so this is the way, this is, I'm showing you some index cards that have some of my quick drawings on there and little writing, narration, and dialogue. So this is for a comic I did, one of the very first comic I did since becoming a mom. So I drew this comic called Lines in December of 2019. So my son was about 6 months old at the time. And so um, in the old days, before I became a mom, I would spend most of my time writing and drawing at a desk. So it was either at my desk or somewhere else, but it was always sitting in at a table. And that's something that is just pretty much unrealistic when you become a mother and you're taking care of a baby. And so I started just taking index cards around with me, like wherever I went. And so whenever an image or an idea for a panel popped up in my head, I would just quickly, pull out an index card and quickly jot it down and then kind of go on about my day. And then over like a week or so, or a couple weeks, I would have a pile of this kind of mess. And then, whenever I had like 20 minutes or so, I would sit down and kind of rearrange these pictures that I made and the narration that I wrote down and some of the dialogue to see if I could see a story emerge. And so that's how I worked to create this very short comic. It's only 2 pages. But it kind of, for me, this comic is important because it started opening up my idea of what making comics could be since becoming a mother. And that's expanded into the book I'm currently working on. It's my second book, and it doesn't have a title right now, but it's a full-length graphic novel that is about a fictional neighborhood in Baltimore called Solace Homes. And this neighborhood is in an area that has been zoned for mixed industrial use. So there's heavy industry, side-by-side people in a community. And I look at the everyday life of a handful of people who live there. And I kind of tease out the destruction of this neighborhood due to the city's negligence and industrial mismanagement. And I had a few pages. I had been working on this like before getting pregnant and having a child, and then I kind of put it to the side because Hot Comb came out first. And in 2019, I started working on more pages for it, and then I signed a contract for this book March of 2020, so right at the beginning of the pandemic, and also when my son was about, I guess he was about 8 or 9 months old at the time. And so, like everything, and you guys all know this too, with the pandemic, everything shut down. And so I wasn't able to, I wanted to travel back home to Baltimore to check out some neighborhoods that inspired me to create this story, and I wasn't able to. And so I've had to rely heavily upon the online archives, which in retrospect really worked out great because if I'm honest, like being a mother to a very young child, it's very hard to get out and travel the way I would have been able to beforehand. And so what the pandemic did was um, where I would have in the past had to have gone to these cities, like to Baltimore, to be able to access um, archives at places like the Pratt Library in Baltimore, at the Museum of Baltimore, or the Baltimore Museum of Industry. These spaces started putting um, more of their work and what they've been collecting online, and so I was able to easily access like newspaper articles and photographs that before the pandemic I wouldn't have been able to access, which worked out great for me because then I could, be with my son and also do some background research for my book. And so one of the things that I've done um, is I like to do is look at old Baltimore newspaper old Baltimore newspapers and just kind of read the articles to see if anything interesting emerges. And so, I read an article and then I write down lines that strike me as either being full of imagery or maybe reminding me of a memory or I don't know. It doesn't have to be like a specific reason, but it just strikes me in some way, and I'll write it down on a piece of paper. And then what I started doing was just drawing in my notebook, uh, either a picture from a photograph or just a picture that popped up in my head, and then I would write these lines from these newspaper articles down in kind of a poetry form, and I'm going to put that in quotations because um, I'm I don't typically write poetry. I don't consider myself a poet in any way, shape, or form, um, but that is something that I've started to do with this book, and I think it's because it helps me better imagine myself in these fictional spaces that I'm trying to create to tell a story. And so I can quickly just read this. And so all of these lines here come straight from the Baltimore Sun. And the title of the article I read is called "Phase Out Fairfield." And this article was published on January 29th, 1966. Um, 1942 response to wartime housing shortages, detached wooden structures, brick and asbestos, low-cost housing, unpaved streets, neither sidewalks nor sewers, no curbs, no gutters, gasoline tanks and railroad yards, vacant lots and abandoned cars surrounded by industries, a 1942 response to wartime shortages. And so I think I've done this about at least a dozen times. And I've only, so I draw and write these in my notebooks, um, but I never reference them or go back to them. I haven't yet. And so I actually don't know where all of them are, but I do it because I can break up the steps in lots of little pieces, and so I don't have to sit in one space for a long period of time to create these little images, these little scenes. And it helps me, again, pretend that I'm in the space where my story is taking place. And I need that. For me, I need that um, entryway more so than the large blocks or chunks of time to work on a comic that I used to really rely upon or just take for granted before becoming a mom. And so, yeah, and another thing I do with the online archives is look at pictures. So this one comes from the museum, Baltimore Museum of Industry. And I'll just go through the pictures and stop at one that might strike my interest for whatever reason. So this one is of the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. I think this is a foundation pit. And this photograph was taken in 1933. And the reason why I paused at this picture is because if you look in the upper right corner, you'll see some row homes up there. And so for me, I was just like, oh, okay, so there are families who live very close to this industrial site, and maybe the workers in this foundation pit live there, and they have families who live there. And so I got really curious about that because of the story that I'm working on. And so what I did was draw. I moved to another space so I didn't look at this photograph, and then I drew that photograph from memory and added whatever details I thought I wanted to add. And then the next thing I did was ask myself some of the sensory questions that I learned when I was a project assistant for Linda Berry, and she has this in a ton of her books. So there are questions like, where are you? What time of day or night does it seem to be? Where's the light coming from? And again, it's a way to like imagine yourself in this space. Either it's a space from memory or it's this pretend world that you're creating in your stories. And so, I asked myself these questions when I drew this picture, and then I, at some point grabbed another index card and I just drew what I thought I imagined was behind me. And so in this scene here, what's behind me is a community of people. They live in trailers. Families live there. So I drew a girl on a swing, and then I also drew railroad tracks behind their homes. And then, I'll go back to the drawing of the photograph that I made at some point. And then for this one, I got really curious about the people in the foundation pit. And in the original photograph, you can't really see their faces. And so on another index card, I drew all of their faces out, just, a very quick drawing. And then I went back to my drawing of the photograph, and for whatever reason, I was curious about that guy in the water, like who he is, his family, his backstory, what motivates him in his everyday life. And so at that point, I gave him a name and I said, Cletus Johnson. That sounds like an old school Black man's name. So his name is Cletus Johnson. And then on another index card, I'll draw him young. I drew him young. And then on another one, I drew him old. And then I would engage in the same writing and drawing exercises that I've been doing, I guess, for about 10 years now. And at some point I said, okay, so Cletus lives in this industrial site, in a community that lives near this industrial site. And he's in one of these trailers. And what, another thing that inspires me is just this idea, well, not the idea, but just the history of Black Americans, descendants of slaves, who have come up from the South to the North to escape Jim Crow during that time and for better opportunities. And I was thinking, oh, maybe Cletus is one of these people who did that, and this is the area where he ended up when he left the South. And so from there, I did some more writing and drawing exercises to come up with a little comic to give me a sense of his backstory. And so here I said, okay, Cletus likes to do macrame as a hobby. He likes to go fishing. He's a World War II vet, and he has some sort of significant caregiving role for his grandson, and he has a dog. And then I decided, so Cletus is not in my story for about Solace Holmes. He's not one of the main characters. I might put him in as a side character, but I'm not using these pages. But this is my way of working now to better immerse myself in the world that I'm creating when I don't have the extended hours and periods of time that I used to have before having my son. And I'm always curious about where and how people work. So this is my workspace. So I do have I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky people who can work from home, and I have a designated workspace. But since the pandemic, my workspace has become, and also since becoming a mother, my workspace has become just another play space for my son. Yeah. So when I'm working, this is where I work, which is it's always a little messy. And so another thing, and this is has influenced me, it might seem a little off topic, but I just felt really, I felt like it was really important to say, just in case there are any cartoonists out there, and they're looking for maybe new pathways or journeys for their storytelling with using pictures and words. But since 2020, there's a lot has gone on, not only the pandemic, but the protests, the non-peaceful protests against anti-Black racism and the police brutality, and then also climate change has, impacted everyone, including me, not only in terms of how I think about being a mom, but also with regards to what's important to tell when I make comics and how I want to tell them. And so in 2020, it was really a really terrible time for wildfires. And there's a wildfire season. If you're not familiar with it, there's a wildfire season on the West Coast every year. And so it's not something that's unfamiliar, but in 2020, it was really bad in Colorado. And it was one of the first times I had ever seen ash falling from the sky for weeks, almost months at a time. And so it gave me a lot of anxiety about just how can I protect my son with protect him from the health hazards of these wildfires, and just really feeling paralyzed by that. And on top of all of the protests against anti-Black racism. And so it was a real turning point for me where I realized that I had to, moving forward, I really want to make that effort to include aspects of the environment and about climate change in every story that I tell. And I think that with making comics, or at least with comics, it's uniquely positioned to do that because the stories are not just told by words, they're also told by pictures. Um, and so you can include aspects of the environment, of global warming, the devastation that that's causing in communities, particularly communities of color, and also particularly like Black communities. You can include that in the stories in a way that might not, in a way that doesn't take away from the broader narrative that you're trying to tell. And so that's also something I'm experimenting with in my latest work. And so I'm not going to read this, but these are scenes from the book that I'm working on now, where I'm thinking about climate change and parenthood, particularly motherhood. One thing that I included in, I revised in this book was that uh, at first I made the main character just a single mother, just living with her daughter, but I revised it to include to make her household an intergenerational household so that, you know, she has her mother there to help her out. And that was a very comforting move for me. It meant that I had to do a lot more work. I have to do a lot more work to revise it, but I really feel like it was a good move because um, it gave me uh, a sense of calm with everything that's been going on, to at least be able to write stories where there is this kind of community and family support in spaces that are just highly stressful and can be painful to be in. And so that's what that's one of the significant changes that I've made for the current story that I'm working on. And I'll end it with this. Um, this is my son sitting on my back while I am drawing, not for my second book, but I'm drawing something for a magazine. And so, yeah, that's it. Okay. I hope that wasn't too long, but
That was really awesome.
I'm done.
I'm looking forward to that book, so I'm just really excited to see that. Thanks, Ebony. I'm going to share my screen as well. Okay. I hope you all can see that. Let me know if, let's see. Okay. So first of all, thank you, Yona and the Center for inviting me today. It's just really exciting to be able to talk about new work and also comics and to share the space with Ebony and Marcel. I wanted to talk about the project that I'm working on, which is kind of a departure from um, what I'm used to doing. And so I really wanted to share my process and just the journey that I've kind of been on making this book. It really started in 2011, right after I uh, published with Dylan Williams through Sparkplug Comic Books, Whirlwind Wonderland. I really wanted to. I had a new project in mind. I was very fascinated with Detective Comics and EC Comics, and a very different thing that I was focused more on memoir comics and autobio, but I was really interested in this in the world of EC Comics, and also I was getting immersed in a lot of film noir. And everybody, like I guess friends know that I love classic Hollywood films, and so I really wanted to make. It's sort of like how Boogie, Blame This on the Boogie, was an ode to musicals. I wanted to make an ode to classic Hollywood film noir, and some of my favorite films. And so, like films like This Gun for Hire with Alan Ladd and Laura, with my favorite Dana Andrews, and The Big Sleep, and The Naked City, and the grittiness of that story, and Lady from Shanghai, and just having San Francisco as the backdrop. And so having an opportunity to tell a story, and also Thin Man, which is one of my favorites. We watch that every year for New Year's. It's tradition. But what I wanted to do was use this genre to also put Filipinos in the spotlight in a genre that usually isn't set, or it's usually reserved for white lead movie stars from the 30s and 40s, and I wanted to put Filipinos in that lead role, and because usually they're just, especially Filipino representation in the media, in entertainment, it's just I think there's still a lot to do, and I was just thinking about talking about putting Filipinos in the forefront, and just knowing that, especially in California, we're one of we're the biggest Asian community in California, and we're still underrepresented. And I wanted to through my comics making, kind of give a voice to this community. And part of it was just showing, humanizing Filipino Americans, especially during this time. And the film noir that I was interested in was 30s and 40s, but I really wanted to focus also in the Filipino American immigration experience. And it was mostly starting in the 1920s, when the Philippines was a territory of the U.S. And so when around the 20s, Filipinos came over and became part of the farm labor movement after the Chinese and Japanese, as farm workers and cannery workers and everything else. But I wanted to also show that that Filipinos were human, and they had lives, and they had dreams and personalities and style, as you can tell from this slide. And also to bridge that to my own family experience, my own family's history. And especially going to school in California and San Francisco State, I've been exposed to a lot of, just had access to a lot of resources and classes, and they have this amazing ethnic studies program. And that is where I really learned about the Filipino American and immigration experience, especially in California. And so I knew about that, but I'd never really connected it with my own family history. And through, especially, I've kind of, heard, listening to my family's history, just in talking with relatives, just casually in dinner parties or whatever, or looking at photographs, just knowing that, oh yeah, your great grandfather came, you know, way long time ago, and now we're here in San Francisco, Oakland, and we came to Pittsburgh, and you know, this is our life. And so it's sort of an afterthought. And so until I made this book and started researching and talking to people, interviewing, and just learning more and reading more, I never, I really got this, didn't really hit me until then that my great granduncle and great grandfather were like a part of this whole Filipino immigration experience in the 20s. They were a part of the Manong generation. The Manongs, they're they're the young bachelors who came from the province where my family's from, the Ilocos and Ilocos Sur specifically. And so this is a picture of my great grand uncle Ambrosio in December 1926. So just knowing that he's a part of this community, and so using that to kind of inform and to inspire my comic that I'm working on, which is a fiction comic, kind of helps me, kind of grounds me into like, this is a personal story, but also based on lives, but just that's the inspiration to help me keep it like something that's a lot more personal and closer to me. It's not just these fictitious people, but that in a way that I have them sort of background in the story, so I feel there's a connection there, and just also just in general, just bridging family, like my family from Ilocos, from San Juan Lapog in province, and little town in the Philippines, and the connection of, you know, my great grandfather being able to journey on a ship from the Philippines to the West Coast, and how that all just leads to just me in my, you know, members only jacket with my mom and hanging out in San Francisco. How that, it's really interesting how all that just leads, what how that all is connected. And so part of my process for this book was, first off, was just like a lot of research. And when Ebony was talking, I started this book. I put this in the back burner for a long time in 2011. That's like, you know, 11 years ago. So I put it way back on the shelf. And then I wasn't until 2 years ago, when we were shelter in place, you know, we were stuck in our homes, and still kind of stuck in my house. But that's when I had the confidence to really do this book. And when Ebony was talking about research and not being able to go out, I did really rely on a lot of online sources, and, you know, of course, like books and everything else. But thankfully, there's a lot out there, and it's thankfully it's to all the ethnic studies professors and historians and people that have been able to get accounts from members of the Manong generation and doing interviews with them and making that accessible online. It's just been very helpful in creating this world. And so doing the research, I really focused on certain aspects of the immigration experience, and it was the farm laborers in the Central California and Watsonville and Stockton, and also the men who journeyed through Seattle and also Hawaii, working in the canneries. And a part of research is also researching a lot of the aspects of racism and discrimination, marginalization, scapegoating that a lot of Filipino Americans had to endure. This here, Positively No Filipinos, was a sign that was in a hotel in Stockton, I believe. Exclude the Filipinos was a op-ed piece in a labor newsletter. And then work. This one on the right was an actual postcard or note threatening a farm, a farmer who was hiring Filipinos at the time. So yeah, so through online archives, I was able to find a lot of local newspapers and newspaper clippings. So a lot of clippings about the Watsonville riots, violence towards Filipinos, also the anti-miscegenation laws. A lot of the Filipinos who immigrated this time were young bachelors, so there was a lot of a resentment with that, with them matching up with white women, and especially the whole taxi haul and scene that had created huge racial tensions. So using all that history and knowledge through these online sources, I was able to incorporate that into my story. And then also part of the research was just interviewing. I interviewed my aunt. I got some information from my mother about their parents who were in during this time, and I was able to find from my aunt, another aunt, find these photo albums that had pictures of relatives and friends, and so just being able to see that personal aspect of how my family is a part of this history, and so also just humanizing this community, this group of people, that they were, guys looking dapper in suits and were excited about the American dream and leaving a country that had an economic depression and trying to make money and also help their families back home. And I saw pictures of them having being social and having parties and having homes and having cars and being a part of a community. So it was just really exciting to see that as being part of this whole immigration experience. So writing and drawing was very different. This is a very different process than I'm usually with my comics. It's very spontaneous, and I draw like straight on the page, and it's all very crazy, and I mean, I don't know what I can call it, but it's just a very different process than what I'm using now for this specific book. And so for this book, I'm actually doing it all through an iPad, mainly because I don't really have a studio at the moment, and my studio is actually my couch right now. And so my iPad is like, I was really against, or just didn't know how to use the iPad for a long time. And then I guess I had sort of guilt that I had this iPad and wasn't using it. And so I felt like I needed to learn how to use it. So now somehow, I don't know how it happened, but I'm really kind of in love with Procreate. It's just really weird, but so I'm doing this whole book through Procreate. And so I also created this. I actually created a script and an outline, and that's something I normally don't do. And so it was just a way to kind of organize all of the plot points and the character arcs, and then just and also having this huge. I also have started thumbnailing, which is crazy. I don't thumbnail, but so I had this big book of my thumbnails, and so to go back on, and also to kind of figure out how things look in the page and as a spread, and just being able to look at that really quickly and also move things around. And then a part of the drawing process was also just getting inspiration from artists, especially Detective Comics, and not so much their style, but just like the tone and the feeling that it conjures. Their style conjures up, for me is kind of inspiring. So like Alex Toth, and his black and white and his real simple line work, you know, and it's just very striking. Um, and then Kriegstein, and just like his cinematic quality and how he lays out the page. Butch is one that I just love, his painterly way of doing things. Just you could just see the energy just come out of the page when the way that, especially with this page, it's just very inviting and cinematic. And then Darwin Cook is just like was a huge inspiration behind this book early on, especially. And again, just having that cinematic quality, and just you could just feel like you're in a movie, and it's just really just captivating for me. So I'm gonna show a sneak peek of my book, and I'm not gonna, you can just imagine the voices. I'm not gonna do voices for you, but you can imagine maybe your favorite actor from the 30s, 40s in using these. And another thing I didn't actually add on here, but a lot of the characters are based on research of trying to find Filipino actors during the 1930s and 40s in that time. So like I was trying to look for a lot of movies at a time. A lot of them are lost, so it's hard to track them down. So I was incorporating a lot of movie stills, and I wish I included a slide to show all the photos. But so that was sort of like what I based these characters. And so it starts off in Central California, and with these three characters. On the left is Angel, the middle is Edison, and the one on the right is the lead character, and his name is Alessandro Wanez, but everybody calls him Bobot, because because I just love Filipino nicknames. I wanted to put a Filipino nickname in there so that people would have to read it. I just like hearing people say Bobot. So this I'm gonna just show an excerpt of like one day getting ready for the work a day on the field. And so Edison is saying, they're making me work the machine again today. I can ask them to switch us today. See, again, making the rest of us look bad. Put this under your wrap for more support. Yeah. Thank God for that medical degree you got in Manila. At least you can't say it didn't go completely to waste. Until maybe you can always man the machine instead. No, thank you. I know where my place is, just as you should too. And judging by your smell, the way you smell, your place probably is a toilet. And also, it was a law degree. Okay, listen up, fellas. We got a lot today. The faster you go, the more dough you make. But we got to get it all done by the end of the day. All right, boys, let's call it a day. Honey, what's for dinner? Tinola, my dear. Tinola is a Filipino dish. It's like a chicken soup. It's one of my favorite comfort foods. It's Friday. Gotta make sure my hands are all nice. Edison, why don't you come with me tonight? You're so huffed up. Girls and dancing will loosen you up. Bobot, are you going tonight too? Bobot? Pfft, he's staying in to pray 10 novenas to that saint he has back home. Ha 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 ha. Sigh, well, here goes nothing. Have you ever thought about not wearing your glasses? No, why? God, it's great to be out of that farm. Yeah, and to not smell like dirt for once. Aw, Edison, why you so quiet? Don't worry, they treat you like a king in there, right, Sal? So true. I guarantee you'll let loose with so many wonderful pretty girls. Oh, is that right? That's right, Edison, and not a care in the world. Milady. So charming. Millie, you dance like an angel. Thanks, doll, I took classes. Ha, didn't take him too long, huh, Edison? Edison? Hi. You dance? Yes. I don't really know what I'm doing. Here, let's start with hands and go from there. All right. My name's Edison. What's yours? Alice. Oh, as in Wonderland? What? Oh, sure, I guess. Where have you been all my life, Sally? Well, I just moved from Omaha a year ago, and it's Susie. My cousin's in Seattle. I haven't seen him in 2 years. But as Tolstoy once said, the two most powerful warriors are time and patience. Ha, wow, you're so funny. What? It wasn't meant to be a joke. No, it's not that. It's just that you're not like anyone I ever met in here or anywhere else, really. You hear about all those strikes in the canneries in Seattle? There's no way that'll happen down here, though. We need more support. Wilbert was a lawyer. Maybe he can start something for us. And then eventually the story leads, um, again, goes to up to San Francisco, and past Chinatown and into the Filipino community of Manila Town. And so that's where the story will mostly be at. So that's my sneak peek, and that's one of the characters. And yeah, so thank you so much. And that is a photo of me and my mom a long time ago, right in front of the cathedral learning. So yeah, so stay tuned and thanks so much.
That was wonderful. Thank you both for those wonderful presentations. And while I'm at it, I just want to, hi, I'm Marcel Walker. I'm very glad to be here today. I want to thank the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics for putting this program together. I want thanks to Yona Harvey and Stefan for facilitating my involvement and requesting I moderate this discussion you're about to see here. Thanks to Ebony and Rina for their work and taking the time to be here tonight. It was fascinating hearing you talk about your work and your behind the scenes processes. And I have other questions. I recognize, having read both of your works, your most recent works, it's very easy to feel like you know somebody from their work. It's not unlike the movies that you describe, or even in comics works, like you can often feel like you know people, especially when the works tend to be autobiographical in nature. But then you actually get to know the person. So hopefully I'll get to know you even more now that you've shared a little of your work. I want to actually just to give everybody, to give both you and people watching a sense of where some of my conversation is going to draw from. I want to explain some of my thinking with comics, which is So I often use a term which is graphic prose when I'm talking about books arts, and I term to distinguish between the content and the form of the comics arts. So I also use the term graphic poetry to reference similar work that isn't as focused on a fixed narrative. And the long and the short of it is, if you think of it like water, you can get water in a glass, you can get water in a bottle, you can get water in all kinds of things, but the water is the water is the water. People, I noticed, get hung up on terminology, comic books, graphic novels, whatever. And for me, the water is the water is the water. So to get away from that a little bit, I often refer to things as graphic prose. Now, I'm not funny about it in the sense that if people want to refer to it as comics, that's totally fine. But you'll hear me slip into that and refer to the graphic prose arts. That's where that comes from. So I'm curious, my first thought, and this is for both of you, and you can answer whatever order you'd like. So a number of these questions are for both of you. I have a few that are for each of you, but I think it's just easier to just talk to you both here. I'm curious, what was the first work of graphic prose that either of you read, which you could feel was telling a personal, intimate story? Like where you actually felt something that went beyond just entertainment or curiosity. What's the first thing that you each read that like resonated with you, where you knew that was coming from a personal place?
Well, when I started doing comics again, and early on when I was a kid, I loved, Sunday Funnies and Family Circus and Peanuts. But I think and then I just sort of went into art and drawing and painting, and I came back to comics a little after college. And I think the one book that really resonated and really was like, wow, it really inspired me was Chester Brown's I Never Liked You. And it was a collection of some of the stories of his coming of age in Montreal, in this little tiny suburb in Montreal, and his family, and especially his mom, who had schizophrenia, and also just his friends who were in the neighborhood. And so that for me was like the first time, like, this is a different type of comic book that I really ever knew. And it was, and one of the reasons was why, because it was talking about a personal story, and I never really saw that in comics before. Like, you think about, again, Sunday Funnies and Marvel and all the other things. That's how that's what I really thought was comics before I saw this book and some other books. But that one was just really, it blew my mind, because it was telling a story I had never seen in comic form before. And that was really personal and very open and honest about how he felt and how he interacted or couldn't interact with other, like, his contemporaries, and also and also be honest and open with his mother. And yeah, so that one for me really kind of changed sort of my look on what comics could do and what kind of stories could be told.
I guess for me, I never read comics when I was a kid. It just wasn't something I was interested in. I didn't really read much at all. I watched a lot of TV, and I was outside a lot playing sports. So I would say, like, I didn't really get into comics until I was in my 30s. And so it was Linda's being in Linda's class and listening to other people read their work out loud, and then seeing the work that they did. And it was very personal, like Rina was saying, like, it was personal in a way that I never really expected with pictures. And so I was just like, oh, I want to kind of take this seriously. Like, at first I was just like, oh, I'll just see what happens, and if in this class, and if nothing else, I can just drop the class. That's what I was thinking when I first took Linda's class. I can just drop it in like a week before the deadline's up. But I stayed because of the stories I heard. They're very personal, and the space was very inviting. And so I guess with like published work, maybe Persepolis was one of the books that I saw when I got around to reading comics that I remembered
Okay.
appreciating. Yeah.
Those are great choices. Those are really great choices. I have a definite affinity for what I refer to as comic book auteurs. So the comics creators who both
That's
write.
us, right?
That's you. That's both of you. Comic book creators who both write and draw their own work. I have also taught for a lot of years, more years than I care to admit, making comics myself. And so some of your comments here echoed my observations from an instructor's point of view. And, you know, and I always gave my students, I taught a lot of kids, I've taught a lot of adults as well. A lot of my kids are adults now, and some of them still make comics, which is crazy. But I always gave them room to, if they wanted to collaborate, because I do enjoy collaboration with others. But I myself grew up to write and draw comics, so I have an affinity for other comics creators, graphic prose creators who write and draw and the choices they make. So I'm always fascinated by process. So that's why I was paying particular attention as you both talked about your process and how you make the work that you make and the choices that you make to detail your narratives. So I'm going to inquire now about what active choices do you make to portray the details? Because you showed us a lot of like the background and the research and the things you do to give your work authenticity. What are some of the active choices you make to portray those details within the constraints of a comic book page? Because that's a very specific place to be doing that. Or I guess to kind of put it another way, where do you perceive your own strengths or weaknesses or both as comics creators, as comics auteurs? Because since it is all your voice.
So a side note, so I didn't know that with making comics, I thought a person did everything because that's how I taught it. I was taught to do it. And so when Linda was like, no, it's like everyone has like a little job. There's a writer, I was like horrified by that. Like, how can they do that? But people can do it and be successful with it too. But I was just really confused when she told me that. But anyway, I would say I don't know, maybe Rina can add something, but I'm still thinking about.
I mean, I came from that same place too, where like I come from self-publishing, and so you have total control over what type of content you want to put out there and how you want to show it, and it's your way, and it's not the Marvel way of doing things. And so so that has always been, that's really kind of where I'm based, is like this is this little thing, this project of mine, and I have total control. But that said, especially with this project, I really do lean on a lot of collaboration in terms of like people reading my work and so that I'm not just in a vacuum, or that I'm just not in my little shed. It's also always good to have another perspective on how my story is being told, especially this one. Yeah, I come from a world that's that isn't kind of assembly line type way of doing things. Like there's a person who does this and there's a person, and so it is a little bit. It is. I'm not quite used to having those 3 different jobs. I guess it is a really interesting question, because I think I'm just really based. That's what I know, is that I do the drawing, and I think my strength though is the drawing. Really, I first and foremost I came into comics is the visual side, and even when I showed those works, it's mostly the visual side I'm really interested in. With EC Comics, there's a lot of writing in there, and like big bubbles of writing, and I'm just like, oh. And so, yeah, visual is always the first, and then the writing came after, and somehow, I've kind of learned to try to strengthen my writing, especially dialogue, but it really was first and foremost visual, just because of my artistic background. I've just always been interested in that.
Yeah. I guess my strength would be experimentation. Just giving my background, I'm pretty willing to try anything that pops in my head. Like clearly you can see from my presentation, I'm like, yeah, sure, let me make this poem. Kind of thing. So I'm willing and able to jump down rabbit holes for a while and kind of enjoy those spaces. So,
and those are great attributes, I think, for a comics creator. And just to play fair, just so you know, I entered the world of comics actually on the other end as a little person, but I also only knew what I knew. I didn't really have anybody to show me or tell me how this worked. For the longest time, I always saw myself entering into the mainstream world of comics as a comic book pencil artist. And it was only as I grew up, because I knew the chores that were involved. I knew the different roles. And that was the one that I had the most natural affinity for. But I also did not have any collaborators when I was growing up. So at some point I realized, oh, I need stories if I'm going to draw something. So I just started writing stories really as an addendum to this thing I wanted to pursue. And then other things followed, including inking and lettering and coloring. And that allows me to segue into something else I wanted to talk to you about. The best part of doing things like this is I get to ask the questions that come to me while I'm reading the work. So I wanted to ask you both about color in your work, or the lack thereof. A lot of people don't know this about me. I'm also partly colorblind. Now, I do color some of my work, but I'm also very comfortable in black and white. And I have a theory that a number of comics artists are colorblind. Like there are a number of comics artists that are colorblind. They gravitate to comics because it can accommodate that. But I have a lot of theories. I also, in terms of an art theory, I have this belief that color tends to make audiences focus a little bit more on place, on the physical, whereas lack of color makes people focus a little bit more on moments. Now, I am definitely open to challenge with that, but I'm curious about both of your approaches to the visual aspect of your work. And is it how much of that is conscious, like when you're doing your writing? I know some of your writing is done while you're developing your visuals. What role does color play, or black and white artwork play, in the evolution of your stories?
Mine will be really quick. So in the beginning, I just did black and white because it was the cheapest to reproduce, and it was just totally like it was fast to make and then fast to print and quick to do and cheap to do it. So and now I just feel like I just haven't explored enough with all the things that just black ink and ink wash can do. And so maybe once I've exhausted that, I will start moving over to color. Maybe not, I don't know. But I do stuff in color, but not to show necessarily. But yeah, I just like black and white.
And you already answered what was going to be a follow-up question, which was, could you see yourself working in color? But it's nice to know that you do some work in color.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, I don't do a lot of editorial stuff, but there's a handful of things that are maybe in the New York Times that is in color. And then I did another story that is construction paper collage, so different colors with that. But yeah, when I'm making comics, it's just black and white. I just like the way it looks.
You do great work. Yeah. And Rina.
And I also think, like early on when I was doing mini comics, or still, you do think about how how you're going to print this, how it's going to be published, and a lot of times, black and white is the only way to go, and it's again, like Ebony said, the cheapest and the easiest. And and I don't think I started using color until, well, mainly when I was just doing my kind of like daily doodles. That really was what a lot of my comics stemmed from, was sketchbook drawing, sketchbook comic strips. And so I just was drawn to using colored pencil when I don't even know where that started. I think it actually probably was because I just had this one sketchbook that was, it actually was an agenda book, a daily planner that my mom had bought me. My mom buys me these daily planners, and as everyone else probably knows, that you never really use a daily planner. You just like you get it in the new year, and you're like, thank you, and you're like, holy crap, I didn't use any of that. But it was a Van Gogh daily planner, because I love Van Gogh. So I do love color. I love painting, and I love expressionist art. And the paper in that planner was so nice and slick that it felt good using colored pencil on it, and the colors just really popped from the paper. And I think from then I just started using colored pencils, and also the ability that being able to work with Drawn and Quarterly, and they were able to publish in color. So like the whole thing was like, do you have the resources and tools like to be able to actually use color?
Or you can give that responsibility to someone else.
Yeah.
They worry about how to mass
print. And then a lot
it.
of the time when I was doing sketchbook stuff, I would scan it and it would be presented online. So it really is like how the end product is presented. In my case, that's usually the reason why I go certain directions.
That's great. Well, this was for me to hear just other relationships, other artist relationships with color in this medium. Also, I noticed in yours, Rina, there's sections that are monochromatic in nature, and I love the mood that they have throughout that. So, like you made some really
this current one, the one I just showed.
Well, that especially, and so I'm definitely curious to see how that looks in the future here.
Me too.
So
that turns out right. It turns out okay.
I've got confidence. I'm sure, guys. I'm intrigued. I like noir artwork and narrative as well. I want to allow at least a little bit of time here, excuse me, to get to some questions that from our audience members got. And I'm going to give you. I got a ton of questions, but I'm going to throw one more one. See what, and then we'll try and get one or two questions in from our attendees. But so your stories are very clearly, all your stories are personal. They are intimate. How do you react to criticism of your narratives, positive and negative? Like, what is your initial reactions to that?
I don't read those things, so that's my reaction to it. I prefer not to read even positive ones. I don't read any of them, because I think I did that once, and it was a positive review, but the details, like how the person interpreted some of my stories, was different and not necessarily something I agreed with, and then I started kind of ruminating over those comments, even though they weren't negative. And so that for me, it was like, okay, I'm done. I'm not reading these anymore. So that's how I respond to those reviews.
Yeah, I try not to take it too personally, but I throw things against the wall. I don't know. I think what it is that I'm when you set out to do a story, I guess it's really important to be really confident with your choices and your motivations behind it, so you can really defend, or like everything else doesn't matter. And so I'm trying to think of yeah, I think I'm like Ebony, where I'm just not gonna look at that. But I know like the story that I've told is true to myself, and it's a personal, a personal thing, and that's that person's personal opinion as well. And but yeah, I don't know. I try not to think about it, I guess. I think I'm just more focused on what I want to get out of the story, and hopefully it does. I know that it does connect with other people, and I think I take that more than maybe the negative criticism.
Yeah, it can be strange though sometimes, because I know it almost feels like it's kind of like psychology, where they try to get behind like the inner workings of your family and like
Right.
your childhood and adolescence, and
Sure.
that's the stuff where I'm like, okay, so now it's my imagined childhood here, and so
There's like fan fiction of your childhood.
yeah, I'm just like, okay, I'm done. Like yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I can say as a reader, we appreciate you both being willing to delve into your lives and histories for the work, no matter what. So, so I'm going to throw one or two questions at you real fast from our attendees. So you've both relied on digital archives in the creation of your stories. How are each of you archiving your drafts and works?
Backing them up, baby. Right? I don't. And I have this whole printout too. It's like this whole binder stuff when I can. It's like this big thing. But yeah, it's all electronic, and I also have this little like portable printer, and so just to kind of see how it looks like in book form. But yeah, I back it up through. I'm not quite sure what the question is. Is it our pages that we're making?
Well, it asked about archiving your draft. So I guess, do you save? I would imagine, do you save like
I save everything,
versions and things as you go along? Okay.
Yeah, that to the point I just like I can't keep track. Like I'm like, where's that one notebook that had that page of notes for this one chapter? And I'm like, yeah, I keep everything.
Okay.
Yeah, if I don't know if the person's asking because they're curious about how to do that with their own work, if they're a cartoonist. So I use a regular binder with just the little plastic sleeves, and I use the heavyweight clear because the glossy one, because the matte form, it has a weird kind of shine to it. And then I work on 9 by 12 paper, but I cut it down to 8.5 by 11, just because when you go bigger, the sleeves and the binder get very expensive. And so, yeah, just to keep that in mind. And then with the pages that are bigger than an 8.5 by 11 binder, I do have a couple of binders that are bigger than that, but then I just also use one of those regular like archive boxes. I used to just stack them up, and then I spilled coffee on my pages, and so now I put them in a box. Yeah.
I felt a little internal pain hearing you say that. I've been there. I understand that a lot.
I use a binder too, Ebony, when I was drawing, not on Procreate, and the sleeves too. So I'm glad that Ebony, at least that sounds like I'm professional.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to sidestep that, but I have a question. So here's the next one. And I think you've both addressed this to some degree in what you've previously talked about, but see if you have more to say about this. The question is, does more work go into making the story or illustrating? I guess that depends on how you delineate, but what would your answers to that be?
Maybe I need, how do you interpret that question? I don't have a hard time. If it's my story, the illustration part comes together, so I can't tease that out. But when I do, the very few times I've done like stuff for magazines or newspapers, that feels very much like, if it's not a comic, it feels like illustration.
Okay.
And in that distinction, like I did something for MoMA magazine for Juneteenth, like a Juneteenth celebration, and it was like it wasn't my thing. It was for the artist Tourmaline's project called Pleasure Gardening, and I was asked to do 2 illustrations for it, and it felt very satisfying because I rarely work with other people, and the burden of like figuring out what to do was not on me. So I was just kind of following the dream, helping Tourmaline like realize the dream. It wasn't my dream, and so yeah, it was hard work. Like I did work a lot of hours on that, and I had to do a few edits because of just some of the feedback I got back from them. But it just, I don't know, it was easier because it wasn't my work.
Yeah, I think for me, just say quickly, is it's the art is really easy for me to just bang out. It's the writing is a little bit more difficult, especially when you do diary comics, to like make sure that the story is a meaningful one to other people. Like a lot of times with diary comics, is like, I had this breakfast and blah blah blah, and it's like that's just exciting. So you need to like really figure out a way to make that story that you think is exciting for everyone else, and so that part is always sort of like trying to figure out a puzzle. And it's great when you figure it out. But for me, the art just comes naturally. I just love just trying to figure things out visually.
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask one last question, and make it. I'm going to sum up the question I can here, and then ask you to give fairly tight if you can. I could do that, but we don't have all day or all night, unfortunately. So, your development. Can you talk quickly about examples of how you develop characters in your stories, be it through appearance or dialogue or actions associated with them? Like, what are ways that you like to develop? Because comics are also a medium of economy. So, how do you develop? What do you find helpful in developing characters in your stories?
Well, I kind of loved how Ebony developed her characters from her presentation. I thought that was a really great approach.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I might copy that. But a lot of it, I mean, characters, especially some of these characters, I think the lead character actually comes from people that I know, and I probably won't say who they are, but one of them specifically was, there are some personality traits that come from my dad, so there are a lot of things that make it personal. Yeah, that's mostly kind of how I develop the characters for this specific, because I'm used to just doing memoir comics, so like I don't really need to create a character for those, but a lot of it just comes from people that I've met, or traits from people I know.
So I don't know where it is, but I sent out an exercise on character development, and it's kind of, I work a lot with flashcards to make it feel like a game. So it's not too thinky when I develop these characters, and so that little exercise is just one of the ways that I kind of develop a character without trying too hard. And so and then also when I do those exercises, it doesn't mean that that backstory will actually go into the story. Sometimes it's just good for me to know, and it informs how this person will react in certain situations, even if I don't disclose fully like why they are behaving in that way, but it just gives them kind of like a personality, and I know where that is coming from. So it just kind of helps me, give my character a little bit more motivation, even though I'm not necessarily showing all of that in my story, because like you said, Marcel, like you can't draw it all out. We would be drawing forever.
And some of us have tried. Well, one thing I have to commend both of you on, and this kind of character development, but also just reading and atmosphere and everything, is both of your use of music in your narratives. Ebony, I'm methodical because I actually counted in both of your stories and made notations of the pages in which they appeared on. Ebony, I counted 5 songs that appear in yours.
I saw that. I'm cutting you off. I saw that email that you sent out. So the songs that are actual songs by artists who exist are from the comics that are memoirs, so creative nonfiction ones. And then because my hot comb is a mix of fiction and creative nonfiction, and then the other 2 I totally made up. Like I listened to like Betty Swan, and kind of like the doo-wop era to like come up with that. And then I'm a big gospel fan. I like Tremaine Hawkins, and so that's what I listen to come up with my songs.
I appreciate that.
I can't sing worth anything, but yeah, I will write a song.
I love that you're a songwriter.
For our attendees, just so you know, I sent an email to both of our creators earlier, letting them know that I was a little obsessed with their music in there, and I was trying to hunt it all down, and there was those 2 in Ebony's stories that I wasn't able, and eventually I think I picked up she made these up. But thanks for that information.
He was looking all over the place.
Oh yeah, and then when Rina, so I have a playlist on Spotify, so anybody who's out there who really wants to get the atmosphere for that, look up the Blame This on the Boogie playlist on Spotify for Marcel Walker, and there was 42 songs. Now yours, there was a little
that was
bit of
great.
It was, but you know what?
I didn't even know I had I didn't even know if I had 10. I was like 42.
Well, you also there's some that are referenced, and there's some where we see things mostly, but yeah, 42 songs that I could tell, and I tell you, it's a lot of fun to listen to that. So I would recommend.
I saw that playlist. I'm like, there's some songs that people will not want to listen. like 3 songs from Mary Poppins. Not quite sure.
I think it's great music for reading. And what I found interesting was when I was listening to it, because yes, I actually did listen to both of them. It actually took me through your narrative while I did that, which I thought was really fascinating. I'm kind of obsessed with tracks anyway, with film and TV shows. And so I love that we can now do this across media with works of graphic prose. So I applaud for the inclusion of such inspired choices in your work. And I also just want to thank you again for making the time to talk. Now that I've got your contact information, you'll be hearing from me again. And I hope that we get to cross paths professionally as well. I look forward to your future work. And just again, thank you for making time to talk to us here today.
Thank you, Marcel.
Thanks for having us.
And nice seeing Ebony again too.
Yeah. Maybe next time we'll be in real life.
Conventions.
Thank you all for participating in this panel. It was beautiful, fantastic. Thank you to our audience. Be sure to follow CAAPP on Crowdcast and to attend the amazing events that are lined up for the remainder of the week. Thank you and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.